The people who win are not pure visionary. The people who win are the people who do this plus the technocrat. What is a technocrat? A technocrat is someone who is highly skilled at implementing and completion. So those are the two things I look for. I look for someone who's got a little bit of both, and the ones who are really good have equal measures.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today I have Garnet Heraman. So he's the general partner at Aperture Venture Capital, and he refers to himself as a VC of multicultural for the multicultural mainstream. So I'd like to start with that. Can you tell us what you sort of mean by that statement and what do you hope to achieve with Aperture?
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate it. Always good to lime and bond with a fellow Trini. Not quite as good as a river lime, but it'll have to do. Um, so when we looked around the VC landscape and the startup landscape, and we meaning my fund partner and myself, because it's not a one man show; it's more of a two-man show. Um, we thought about our own experiences getting to where we were with fund and fundraising and how the landscape had changed. And I'm fond of telling the story about how I built three companies, I exited twice, I had one exit to a public company. I went through all those experiences over the course of 6 or 7 years as a young entrepreneur in my late 20s to early 30s. And you know I had very few employees of color, I had no investors of color, I had no board members of color, and I was the only person of any color, brown or black, or any other damn color in the room for three different startups, all of which I was the CEO of. And so when we think about the demographic forces and the economic forces and structural things that led to instances like that for part of your career, then we started looking at the demographic changes, things like the majority of America being of color, black, brown, or some other ethnicity, sometime around 2045 or so, and how these shifts are happening, and what it means to be in a formerly lily white world, or industry, in a newly non-white world, non-white majority world. So what does it mean to be, from this very white industry, VC so white, in a very very brown and black and ethnic um, majority country like the U.S. is slated to be based on the census results. So that's where multicultural mainstream came from. What does it mean when we're no longer minorities, right? What does anything mean at that point? VC is just one in a long list of things that is going to have to change when the majority of the world, in other words, the mainstream, is not white.
Very interesting. So the fund thesis, so usually every single fund, if I understand correctly, has a thesis. So besides, to some degree, raising the tide for people of color and giving them those opportunities to generate wealth on a larger scale, what other components of the fund do you guys bring to the table?
In order of to taxonomy, from like more general to more specific. So obviously diversity is a big thing, but we define diversity in three ways. It's not just ethnicity; it's also gender. But the fund is very focused on investing in women, female founders, and the fund is very focused on investing in places outside of the coastal elite clusters, right? Outside of Silicon Valley, outside of San Francisco, in places like Baltimore, Cleveland, um, Phoenix, uh, Boca Raton, and so on and so forth. So that's at a very high level of generality. That's a big piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a little bit more granular, the other piece of the thesis is around financial innovation, or fintech, and insurtech, right? So if you look at what the world has been in this you know white majority world for the last 50 years, 100 years, and what the world might be in the future in a non-white majority world, then you understand that financial innovation, fintech, insurtech, anything related to it, is going to play an increasingly important role in changing the day-to-day lives of people who are living in these new demographic realities, right? And because it changes the individual consumer's day-to-day reality, it by definition has to change corporate reality, right? Because
Hmm.
corporations are made of customers. So that's the basic fun thesis right there. It's fintech x diversity. Um, it's a tripartite definition of diversity. Um, we're seed stage, seed plus in some cases, for for the majority of the investment. Average check is $1 million. It can be as low as 500K and as high as $1.5 million. And we're looking for a particular definition of the opportunity, and we think of it as fintech plus. So the fintech is the obvious things, right? Banking,
Mm-hmm.
payment, investment, insurance, etc., etc. And the plus is some enterprise or B2B small business problem that needs to be solved. And you put those two things together, and that would define the opportunity for us. So, it gives us a lot of latitude to essentially visualize fintech as a horizontal technology, not a vertical segment, right?
Mm-hmm. And since you focus on these different regions outside of the typical Silicon Valley, and to some degree, I'm more so, I just learned about Silicon Alley, so I could maybe date or undate
Mm-hmm.
myself to that degree. Uh, do you notice the traction of regional adoption across these outside of these epicenters, that they tend to gain adoption for certain types of startups? Or is it just, hey, if you're Silicon Valley, you're more or less the only one who gets to do that dominant adoption in these non-Silicon Valley areas? Does that question make sense?
So are you saying, like, so for instance, where we see the traction and growth in VC investments, right, outside of Silicon Valley, is uh, you could knock off the first few, really, right? Silicon Valley, Boston, New York are always going to be the top three. But outside of that, the results get more surprising, right? So all the way at the bottom of the top 15 is Atlanta, and
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta is a place that people thought was a lot hotter than it really is, based on the volume of capital that's available. Atlanta is weird because it's super hot for founders and deals, but there's not a lot of local capital, is from what I can
Wow.
see. and
Interesting.
and and then so then there are some groups that are national, and then they have a way of projecting themselves into Atlanta. um, but there aren't that many groups like that, so that's the reason why Atlanta is in the top 15 and not higher, right? But in between the top 5 and, let's say, Atlanta in the 15, you got places like Miami, Orlando, Tampa. Florida in general is doing well for itself. You got Los Angeles. I think Los Angeles is in the top 5 or top 6 or something. And the Los Angeles ecosystem is big. It's bigger than just Los Angeles. It's Los Angeles, Orange County, Irvine. Here's a little funny thing about Irvine. Irvine has something like 40 or 50 venture-backed fintech companies. Irvine is like a suburb. I
Wow.
mean, it's not even, you know, it's like Queens compared to Manhattan. I mean, seriously. So there's a lot of activity in Southern California. Um, Obviously, there's like Seattle. There are places like Austin, Dallas, Houston. I just lump them together. But
Mm-hmm.
those would be the cities that Chicago is up there now. Columbus is up there now. Columbus, Ohio. But if you look at Columbus, then you have to look at Cincinnati, and you have to look at Cleveland as well. You know, Pittsburgh is in there somewhere. Um, so those are the places, and there's a lot of other smaller places, right? I'm thinking about, like, so if that would be like that middle group of like 5 to 15, then there's places like Milwaukee. There's smaller places in Texas like San Antonio. There's like Sacramento, California. There's like you know for every company that's in that top 10, that 10 from 5 to 15, there's probably two or three of these like even smaller cities and uh, um, up and coming investment hubs around the country. Buffalo, Rochester. I mean, certain parts of New Hampshire and Vermont. Seriously, I'm not. It's Wilmington, North Carolina. I could go on and on.
What?
There's a lot of stuff happening. You know.
Interesting. And one thing I sort of learned about spending some time in the valley, just you live on that coast, so you're in that every day. You've lived in Silicon Alley in New York, and you've seen this notion of, I think, very intense business culture. What's the difference that you see outside of those regions in some of these smaller regions that you've highlighted? Do you see the
Yeah.
same intensity of?
No, 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 not at all. No, no, it's
Hmm,
a good question too. So that's part of the becoming, right? Part of the
okay.
becoming is, I would argue the intensity is driven by the depth and the quality of the ecosystem. So
Ooh.
what are the ecosystem components? The ecosystem components in a typical VC investment hub, VC cluster is what it's referred to historically, is academia, so universities and other types of schools. Increasingly that would be like code academies and engineering schools and whatever. Um, and then um, uh, corporate headquarters, right? So you know everybody knows, right? Like, the more corporations you have per capita in a place, the more spillover there is. So there's higher income.
Hmm,
There's more vendor selection from around them. There's more, just integration into some of the market forces that are surrounding that city economy or that city market. And at least some of those processes are going to be innovation, right? Not all of them, but some of them will be. So that's important. And then the third piece is capital, right? Because you can't count on individuals, you can't count on corporations necessarily, right? Because they're very risk averse. So there has to be some sort of nexus of independent capital that's looking to be invested in private investment deals. And so angel groups, angel networks, family offices, actual funds, syndicates, um, all this stuff. When you get those three working together, that's
hmm.
typically where the result of that is the intensity that you're talking about.
I
So,
see.
all of these places, from the 10 that are in between 5 and 15, all the way down to Wilmington, North Carolina, that you chuckled at, those things exist, but they exist in different degrees and different quantities, and then maybe the other unknown there is like they're not overly integrated, right?
I see.
So I'll go back to your favorite one to hate, Wilmington. Wilmington has uh, it has like a lot of money. It has a fair amount of money in it, and independent investor type money, private investor type money, and then it has one or two like innovation centers kind of thing, right? Um, there's a branch of it even and it has some academia. There's a branch of the University of North Carolina that's in Wilmington,
Right.
and there's a couple of like small private colleges. So, but none of those three are in great quantities, and none of the three groups are what I would consider like necessarily like thought leaders, right? They're not pushing the boundaries, right? They're replicating. So maybe some of the intensity is different there than you would see in a place like Miami, right? Or a
Hmm.
place like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is on fire.
What?
I mean, I know, right?
Why?
But when you go and you look at what's there in terms of universities and
The
money
universities.
and corporations, there's a lot, and pro sports, and pro sports,
Hmm. Yeah, I hadn't. I never really
which I
thought
guess is a corporation, really. So
technically, right? Yeah, and yeah, it's its own little.
yeah.
I guess it's not really a sub market. It's a full on. It's a full on market. Okay, so this is making sense from the perspective of. I brought up intensity because I started thinking about that today, and as I reflect on meeting people in the valley and just seeing how the pace that they work at. I just watched an interview about Sam Altman's early story, and there was something very
Mm,
clear in him in terms of the just raw intensity that he had, and to some degree, how much of that he brought into, let's say, Y Combinator. And that got me thinking a lot about, we do this show for the people at home, meaning how can they sort of start to play on this global stage. And one of the things I sort of see missing sometimes when I speak to founders at home is that intensity. But these three factors now that you bring in are quite enlightening, because I hadn't necessarily thought about them before.
Yeah, you're just looking at the absence of them, right? But in order to understand the absence of it, you need to understand what makes it, right? And this is something, being the age that I'm at, I learned from the ground up in New York. New York was not, in the late 90s, New York was not a venture capital hub. It was not an investment hub, it was really late to the game.
I
And
see.
so the birth of Silicon Alley was the beginning of my career. So I've witnessed it, and then the real thing that makes me somewhat confident about like looking for the factors and that create these outcomes is watching the city government from Giuliani's administration to Bloomberg's kind of systematically taking that playbook and pushing it to different boroughs around the greater New York metropolitan area. So starting in the Wall Street area right after 9/11, then going out to Brooklyn and going to Red Hook, going to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, going to Sunset Park. Literally, like a military campaign. They kind of went
Whoa.
all around. At this point, just about the only place that hasn't experienced this kind of ecosystem building is the place that's always been neglected, which is which is Staten Island. So
Hmm.
as far as I know, there's not that much happening there. There is some happening, but it's not that much.
Good to know.
But Queens, Bronx, everywhere. Long Island, everywhere.
So, in order to have a thriving startup ecosystem, to some degree, that will, if I wanted to summarize, to match the intensity, and the intensity is important, at least from a pace of innovation perspective, to maximize the capital that's in the region. There is the presence of an academic institution, there's the presence of corporate headquarters. So, at least there's tons of talented people, and there's lots of options. Um, then there's the actual market economy and the capital that exists, both from, I guess, independent investors and institutional investors as well. And the last one is the actual corporation from the government. Good, good synergy
Yep.
of, to some degree, impossible things as I think about the Caribbean, and to some degree. And I'm always I try to be a little honest as to where our home region is, and where it can sort of get to. Okay. What
Yeah, that,
what
that
do
would be that would be a fruitful discussion, by the way. That could be because it's kind of blue ocean opportunity, right? Because it hasn't been done, as far as I can see, with some kind of cooperation between, the government and UE, or for example,
Mm-hmm.
and some independent money, some corporate money. Um, that those folks working together, that could start to move the needle on certainly quantity of startups, and
Yes.
hopefully eventually quality and intensity.
So you feel that quantity is a precursor to the quality, or you don't, or
Oh,
do you think like you can get the
I don't
quality out
know.
the gate?
I No, I was just saying,
Okay.
I was just inferring that quantity is easier to change than quality.
Hmm.
That's all.
Good point.
I don't know if it's a precursor. I have no idea. I haven't thought about it systematically enough. But if I had to, if it was a binary question, yes or no, I would probably say yes.
Okay. So I wanted to hop back into Aperture. So what do founders get by joining Aperture that they might not get anywhere else? And all of this is sort of driving towards something, but so it'll make sense soon.
Sure. Okay. So Aperture is special because not because of the amount of money we have under management, because the amount of money is small. We have 75 under management. That and But it's much more so about who's in our LP. The LPs are the investors in the fund. So at this point, we have Bank of America, PayPal, Truist, FIS, Progressive Insurance, and two more that I can't name yet because
Sure.
they haven't closed formally, but another big insurance company and another big utility energy holding company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what's special about us is that you don't get just financial capital. You also get sort of a lot of operating capital, and operating capital is just those resources that you need to scale a company faster versus slower. So a large enterprise customer, right, could be one of my corporations becomes a customer,
Mm-hmm.
with via pilot agreements and this sort of stuff.
Yes.
Sales and distribution support. So even if one of my corporate LPs is not the customer, their customers could be the customer,
Hmm.
and they have a lot more of them than any startup will ever have, right? So which I think you see this at Nvidia. So
Yes.
um, and a number of other things. So guidance on support on the R&D front, on the product development front. Um, every corporation in my cohort has um, lots and lots of R&D and product development resources, and targeted to specific areas that they think are strategically important. And so, to the extent that any portfolio company aligns, with them, then they can avail themselves of some of that knowledge or a lot of that knowledge to help differentiate themselves in the startup market, right? So I feel like Aperture, to use a boxing metaphor, Aperture punches above its weight because
Okay.
it's not like doing business with a couple of guys with a small amount of money. It's like doing business with, when we launched Aperture, the corporations in the LP cohort represented about 750 billion in market cap.
Wow.
So, it's really not about us. It's much more about the corporations that have decided to invest in Aperture.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why I've spent the first portion of this interview on Aperture is to really try to highlight your way of taking a different path to a traditional sort of realm of growing wealth and giving other people opportunities, and in addition helping other people to build wealth through companies. So following that, what are the top three things you look for in a company when you invest?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's not always an easy question to answer, but I have a particular profile I look for, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to share because you're not going to find it very often.
Okay.
so the way that I describe the profile I look for is contrarian technocrat.
Mm.
So a contrarian has a chip on his or her shoulder. They have this like vision on how shit should work, and it's different than everybody else's, and they're mad as hell that the world doesn't work that way, or the product or the technology doesn't work that way, and they're gonna fix it no matter what,
Hmm.
right? So, that's the visionary side. Right? They and what I try to express with that is that the visionary piece has some negative characteristics associated with it potentially,
Okay.
right? Um, but the people who win are not pure visionaries, right? At all,
Hmm.
you know. The people who win are the people who do this plus the technocrat. What is a technocrat? A technocrat is someone, and by the way, it could be government, it could be operations, it could be startups, it could be academia. A technocrat is someone who is highly skilled at implementing and
Hmm.
completion, right? So those are the two things I look for.
Wow.
I look for someone who's got a little bit of both, and the ones who are really good have equal measures.
Yes.
Some people are more visionary than technocrats, but they teach themselves how to be technocrats, and some people are like just more operational, like geeks, and they just love that piece of it, and they can learn by being around the right people, the right strategic people, how to think bigger, right?
Yes.
But that's what I look for, a contrarian technocrat.
I like that a lot. And one of the things
Well,
I
good
see at
luck.
home. Huh?
good luck finding it because
Yeah.
it doesn't happen that often, brother.
Hmm. Why do you think that is?
Because it's hard to do.
It's hard to do. Okay.
It's really hard to do. So let's just take present company and test it, right? So you would think that someone like myself might have a little insight into like how to do both. I I can tell you with great in the spirit of candor, I can tell you with certitude. I'm very weak on the technocrat side.
Hmm.
I built companies, but I was really not a great company builder.
Okay.
I had some lucky breaks, and I had really, really good technocrats around me.
I see.
Um, uh, I have a much, I would be much more on the contrarian side. Like very 80-20 probably on contrarian technocrat, not nowhere near 50-50. Um, and maybe have gotten better as I got older, looking for what it is I need from a technocrat, or how to think and talk like a technocrat, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, I'm telling you, it's not easy. You to think in the spirit of candor, where are you on the spectrum from
Hmm.
contrarian to technocrat? Are
I
you are you a blend of both, or are you are you
I I'm
are
I'm
you
I'm a blend of
disproportionate
both.
on one side?
I'm a blend of both. I don't think I have as much of a chip on my shoulder from the perspective of I'm going to try to make this $1 billion company and take a bunch of people along on a ride with me, right? On the
And nothing
technicals,
else will do. That's the thing, right? Nothing else is acceptable to these people.
hmm. I guess I probably
No,
won't.
it's we laugh about it, but it's true. Like they literally can't sleep at night. They can't eat.
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested in women. They're not interested in men if they're if they're into that. I mean,
Hmm.
they're just not. They're like out there grinding constantly,
Yeah.
right?
I
You
think
know.
I'm definitely on that spectrum, and I've gotten into a lot of trouble when it comes to like relationships, and because for me, like the thought of just laying on a beach and relaxing, I would much rather just
Yeah,
I can't say it, but that's
I
just not
agree.
me. I need to be doing something and working towards something and building
Oh,
something.
okay. So we're opposites.
Yeah, you won't find me laying on the
I had a good
beach.
I had a good run. I had a good run though. My first 6 years in the business, six or 7 years, I was like, you know, 80 hours a week, and
Hmm.
I had to be the smartest guy in the room, which I never was, but I had to think I was.
Okay.
and and I would go to great lengths to make myself think I was.
Mm-hmm.
But no,
One of the things
not
that
so much anymore.
I wanted to make sure that people listening, how do you talk to a VC? I think
uh
that's a weird
Succinctly.
kind of thing because you just don't meet a VC. Well, at least
No,
unless you
no,
live
it's a
in
great
Silicon Valley.
question.
Yeah.
It's a really, really insightful question. Succinctly, very
Hmm.
tersely, because they don't give a shit about you. I mean, I would like to, I'd like to think I'm an exception, but because I pride myself on accessibility, but
Mm-hmm.
and to a lesser extent on empathy, just based on my personal background and the struggles I had to get where I am. But at the end of the day, they don't give a shit about you as a person, So it's they're in the dialogue for the opportunity for a business relationship and a business transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you frame it, it tells you that there's a very specific language, syntax, jargon that you should be talking about. The manner of speaking should be very compact and succinct and terse, and it should lay out. It should describe in some way or another. It should describe what you believe to be the win-win. What's good for me, the founder, and what's good for the investor as an investor.
Hmm.
And I think if you keep those things in mind, most people will do a lot better talking to potential investors.
How do you know when an investor basically I come up to you and I figure out some way to approach you and I start to pitch you? And how do you know when a VC more or less has tuned out on you? Because I think a lot of people can't recognize that when they're in those conversations.
You don't have to recognize. You just play the odds. 80% of
Hmm.
the time, they'll be tuned out.
Ooh. Ooh. Okay.
So you don't need to spend a lot of your gray matter on this one, dude. The vast majority of these people don't listen with intent, right? They don't listen
okay.
with analysis. They don't do the classic definition of active listening. They don't do it.
That's very
So,
intense, though,
and this
right?
leads me right back to your first question. This is why you speak succinctly and tersely and compactly and
Mm,
clinically and stoically and whatever else you want to call it, right?
okay.
Because they're not looking for the actual the fullness of the communication. They're looking for signals. They're looking for indicators. So you need to get those fucking signals. Sorry, you need to get those signals and indicators into that compact, succinct, terse dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's something. You just
Sorry
cursed.
about that.
No, you're good. No, but here's the thing. And I think there's a veil. There's a game. I guess there's a veil that's put up in terms of business transactions that may happen publicly. But then behind closed doors, when you sit down and talk to people, everybody cussing and I imagine in very high stress situations, this type of language comes out. And at least for me, it's very natural for us in our culture. I think I grew up cursing a lot and I curse a lot. And the reason why I bring this up is how have you seen like cursing affect your career? That's a very weird question.
Yeah, no, it's a fine question. Um, so um,
I get scared of it,
I
to be honest, in expressing myself in that way
yeah,
in front of some other
I'm
people.
never scared. I'm never scared of it because it's not. It's the way I talk, and I try
Okay.
to. I'm a big fan of WYSIWYG, and
Mm-hmm.
but here's the thing. The problem I have is that when you get to a certain level of intelligence or discernment or insight, you know exactly what other people are thinking and how they're responding. And
Hmm.
so the problem I have with it is that by doing it, it invites prejudicial judgments from certain types of people, or and
Mm.
some cases, like a lot of people.
Okay.
And the essence of business is collaboration, right? So you don't necessarily need or want to want to alienate a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, I I am with people who I think are sophisticated and like
They can see your intent. They can
uh,
see they have that level of
experienced,
trust.
experienced on the one hand, and then I'm going to say this. I know it's not going to make me look good, but or with people who are very low on the like power equality, right? If there's some
Sure.
people over whom I have a great deal of power and influence, those are the people I curse with, right?
Okay.
Because
Interesting.
one set of people are going to understand it and not care, and the other people are, I don't care if they understand it because
Hmm.
the power distance between me and them is too great, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So um,
So the corresponding outcome.
with people who are like with people who are like my exact peers or people that I need something from, like let's say Aperture is raising money from people, from universities, from corporations, from whatever, from fund to funds. I tend not to cuss over much
Okay.
with those people. And all kidding aside, this goes right back to academia, right? This goes right back to I'm a really good student. I don't know if that
Hmm.
correlates into intelligence, but I've always been a really good student. And in academia, I realized that basically I spoke two different. It was at college I realized that I spoke. So in addition to Spanish and Russian, which I did speak by the time I finished college, I realized that I spoke two languages. I speak the language of academia,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is ex- essentially the conversational equivalent of expository writing, business writing, right? And then I spoke, playground, like, subway language,
Yes.
and and coming from the culture that I came, I've been cursing like a sailor since I was 13 years old. So
Yeah. I grew up in Aba, so I.
yeah, so it was in academia. Like I could see how my professors responded differently to me.
Hmm.
You want to hear? I'm going to give you a story you haven't heard yet.
Okay. Okay.
So, I early in my career, our academic career, right? So I went to Columbia. So this is all about Columbia.
Yes.
I sort of topped out. So I stopped taking regular undergraduate courses and I started taking graduate and like colloquium and seminars and stuff like this. So as like a sophomore, I think I topped out of the regular courses.
What?
So when I started doing that, I had a professor in Asian studies who was an old white guy. What a surprise! And he would see me talking to my friends and this kind of stuff, and he knew me. He knew of me indirectly as this like kid who was like cursing and talking about shit and whatever. And every now and then in class, I would say something, reasonably intelligent, and then fuck it up by cursing. And he accused me of plagiarism.
Ooh.
This is a very
Whoa.
serious thing at an Ivy League school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some and I don't know what the relationship is between like his thought process of me as a guy who like cursed all the time and this, but he at the end of the semester he accused me of plagiarism, and then he said your punishment is that you can't take the written exam. If you want to pass this course, we're going to give you an oral exam. This is a sophomore, right?
Whoa.
And I'm reading the world's like biggest, literature in Asian American history and all this kind of history and art and culture, literature, and these are the great books of Asia, right?
Hmm.
He said if you want to pass and not have an F on your grade, then you have to do an oral exam in front of all four professors teaching this colloquium. And I said, okay. And I showed up mad. Obviously, I was mad as hell, right? And that's a
Mm-hmm.
motivator. I was mad as hell. So I went and I prepared and I showed up and I crushed it. I was like, the motherfucker gave me. He didn't want to, but the other three gave me an A minus, and he had to join the group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, well, fuck you very much. I
I
mean, and this guy is a legend in his field. His
really.
field was Japanese literature and culture and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
this. Old white guy, and like,
Ah. Oh boy. So I appreciate the honesty and transparency, just because I think sometimes when we speak to each other, especially as Caribbean people, and I think Caribbean people curse a lot, and I think every sort of generation curses a lot, and I probably think folks from New York like to curse a lot as well. Um,
of course, it's
it's
all reinforcing.
and one of the things that comes to my mind is at least folks at home try to mimic what they see out here in the US and think that it'll work where they are at home. So can you,
Okay.
to some degree, contextualize a lot of the strategies and ways that startups succeed in Silicon Valley, even smaller regions in the US where you're investing? What should startups at home in the Caribbean region where they don't have a huge market like they have in America or established market,
Yeah.
how should they be thinking?
This is a very tricky question, right? Because
Mm.
no one's going to solve that problem of having a small market. So I can tell you some of the things I've run across. Um, Starting with the most obvious, leave the small market,
Yes.
or to develop for a bigger market. Build for a bigger market.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's like an intermediate like optionality here, right? And that's the diaspora. So the
Okay.
number, right? The number of Caribbeans in North America and in Europe is fucking huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's big. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing it's equal to, if not bigger, than the actual Caribbean population.
That's
So,
interesting. Yeah.
there's that. right? That like our friends at Carib Shopper. I mean, that's a smart business, man. That's a smart business because he doesn't give a shit about selling to the islands. He cares about
Mm-hmm.
every islander everywhere else,
Yes.
living everywhere else. That's
Mm-hmm.
a smart business. We had some nice talks. I think you might have met him, right, at Tech Beach.
Yeah, I could buy a roti and thing online. What do you mean? I in that. You understand?
No,
So
not. I don't know that it extends to prepared food, but it like every
nobody man had
Bernie's
roti
or
by
every Matuks
the man
or
had
every
roti.
Matuks product you ever wanted, every Angostura product, every like traditional brand, like
Mm-hmm.
prepared or durable consumer good you ever wanted is on his website, man.
Yes.
So, and then a whole bunch of other things, right? Like artisanal stuff and apparel and whatever. So look, either I think Caribbeans need to stop thinking of themselves as like woe is me and this kind of stuff about the small
Mm.
market, and there's no solution to the small market in my humble opinion. I'll get back to like that in a minute, but there are plenty of other places like this. Belgium, um, you know, Poland. When you get a successful Belgian entrepreneur or Polish entrepreneur, one of the reasons they were successful is that they built something that was globally, needed.
Yes.
It wasn't about Poland. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
gives a shit, right? It wasn't about Belgium. It
Mm-hmm.
was about selling to Europe, selling to the Middle East, selling to North America, and whatever that's typically software product, right? Is
Right.
so that's the first thing is to shift your frame of thinking about what it is that you want to build. Um, a second strategy that I think could work in different areas is look at the diaspora. What does the diaspora want around the world? That's maybe like a bridge to thinking globally, right? Um, now comes the tricky part, right? If you're in situ and you plan to sell to your local markets, right, your
Mm-hmm.
regional market, then it gets trickier. But this is like a recurring theme for me, right? As a meditator and stuff like this, I tend to sort of spend a lot of time framing and reframing problems. So when you get to someone who's on an island nation, or whatever, a multiple island nation, and who wants to remain local, remain regional, then the shift that's required is basically what your expectations are, right? you know,
Oh. Yeah.
on size, scale, revenue volume. You need to shift that because the odds of you staying local and regional and getting big are pretty slim,
Yes.
and that's a reality. That's not
Mm-hmm.
that's not a judgment, you know. And but so now walking down the logic chain, why is that reframing important? It's not important to just force people to accept second best. That's not what I'm suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to think about what you need from that business if it's going to remain on a relatively small scale. What do
Mm-hmm.
you need? You need profitability. You need margins, which is going to dictate the whole damn business. I mean,
Yes.
so to me, if I wanted to get big, I would think about global or certainly North American. Um, and then maybe as a bridge to that, I would think about the diaspora. If I was staying local, I would think about what the hell can I do that could be profitable, like high margin, high profit businesses,
Yes.
and I would use that as my frame.
Great. What's your
And I
opinion?
know, and I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking other stuff.
And that's another thing that you don't really hear people say publicly, but to some degree, different economies in the Caribbean have a fair amount of their undercurrent from that part of the economy, that shadow part of the economy, and it's not necessarily vocalized a lot, which is anyway. Keep it
Well, they
light.
should follow the lead of the cartel and reinvest in legitimate businesses
Well,
because you gotta get that money washed.
hmm, you'll get me in trouble here. Well, hey, what's your
This is not going to make it past the Trinity censor.
probably what is your opinion
Big.
on brain drain? So a lot of people
brain drain.
There's very strong arguments, I think, on both sides for brain drain. I have a perspective on it that I think is, um, I actually think it's a good thing to some degree, but I'd love to hear your take.
I am I'm sort of mixed, right?
Hmm.
So I think it exists. My family is a great example. We left in 1970 and
Wow.
1969, and a lot of the potential for building businesses and doing things in academia, all left with us, right?
Hmm.
I mean, none of the remaining family had done those types of things, so the brain drain is real for us, um, and very tangible. On the other hand, here I am at the stage that I'm at, and I'm in an extreme minority of Americans of any color who have done what I've done, have fun, still have a little life left to keep making more money. Um, and my thoughts organically run towards Trinidad and towards the Caribbean, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I could find the right deal, I'm doing it. If I could find the right people to do it with, I'm doing it. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
I think the opportunity to do what, like, so my template is Indians, right, from South Asia.
Okay.
So all through the 60s, 70s, 80s, all those people came to Silicon Valley, made a bunch of money. Their family, their kids grew up like Indo-American. There's a whole bunch of jokes about that, right? They're all ABCDs, American-born, confused Daisies. They're all like foreign returned Babus, whatever, right? But that's them. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the 90s and beyond, people started realizing, like, and this is never going to be true for the Caribbean, right? But the force that pulled people back
Yes.
was economic opportunity to go back and do things in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
This same, like, multiple generations of entrepreneurs that made money, they're going back and doing things in India because the sheer market is so big there, right? That's never going to be true in the Caribbean. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying that there is this, like, gravitational pull for people in a diaspora to go back and want to do things with their home country and their
Right.
home region, and that's real. That's very real and very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's never going to happen in the Caribbean on the scale that it has happened for South
Like
Asia, for
India
India in
and
particular.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I.
mean there will be more VC investment in India than anywhere else very, very soon.
Ooh.
Um,
That's very
so
interesting. And
and their economy will be bigger than pretty much everyone
than the
else's
U.S.
very, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's that's going to put India in a very odd position very quickly.
Right. I felt brain drain. I look at brain drain as an ambassador program for certain folks that go out there. For instance, like myself at NVIDIA, I was sharing with someone else. I think there's probably only about 10 of us who are from the Caribbean. We're kind of discovering more and more out of
In
26,000
the
people.
whole
Yeah,
in
out
the
of
whole company.
26,000, yeah, there's like 10 of us
Wow.
that we are aware of as that group of 10, which is interesting. And I hadn't really realized how small the Caribbean region was. I was like, shit, we're like nothing compared to, when I look at,
Population wise, it's small, man.
yeah, when I look at India. So, and I've always had this yearning, like going back home was never an option for me in my mind, just because I knew there was not a market for me to express my skills to reach a certain level. But
That's
now
right.
that I'm here, I'm fortunate enough to work in the top AI company in the world. I get to see sort of state of the art in AI, and I feel a very strong calling to let people at home know, hey, the game is different out there, and it's not just the game that you're seeing at home and in your local neighborhood. So I appreciate you sort of articulating some of that. I know I read through one of your interviews, but I looked at one of your interviews, and you spoke about trust. Okay, and your this may be old in terms of when you did that interview, and your mentor told you that trust everyone but cut the cards, and I wanted to ask you what
Yep.
that meant.
Yeah. It means nothing gets done in business at any scale without partners, without collaborators, and this kind of stuff. And that's the reality of it. And then the sheer numbers of people that you could partner with in a large economy like North America, or God forbid
Mm-hmm.
India, the potential for encountering a bad actor, right? A bad actor, a bad, whatever, corrupt, duplicitous, felonious, whatever. The bigger the economy, the bigger the potential, because there's just more people.
Yes.
And so when you think about those two polarities, that's the essence of what the advice is about, right? So you have to have an open mind and an open heart in order to find the right people and partners to do something at any scale, meaningful scale. But as you get to implement that collaboration, you should always be somewhat careful, and you should be thinking about ways to validate, and use people's behaviors in particular to validate their claims, right? Um, and the essence of that expression is about balance.
Yes. Talk about.
But there's a reality on both sides that's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
can you talk about how you would build trust now, or maybe so? How much of building trust is physical versus virtual? Because a lot of our interactions now, like this, you and I interacting in this virtual platform, we met each other in person, which we're fortunate to have had. But how much of the cementing of trust is still physical?
Yeah, I think that's changed in the last few years, right? It used to be all personal, and now I think there's a lot of things that are now acceptable to happen. Either videographically or digitally or whatever. But honestly, there's one thing about trust building that hasn't changed and probably never will change. Into the far future. In my humble opinion, the basis of trust is having zero space, zero divergence between what you say and what you do. Zero, right? There's an engineering term that you probably are more familiar with. It's about the requirement for precision between two surfaces. I don't know what it's called, but it's when you describe two surfaces and like what tolerance for the gap you can have.
Yes.
And in finer products, more elite products, that gap between the two material surfaces is like zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what trust is. Metaphorically, trust is basically having zero divergence between what you say and what you do.
I like that a lot. I'm definitely
that's valid trust. There is invalid trust, by the way.
Okay.
Not to get too philosophical, but there's a shitload of trust that's based on who you know, what color your skin is, whether or not my father did business with your father, all that bullshit that has caused folks of color and women a great deal of grief as they move up the ladder in the North American economy and the global economy. That's invalid trust, in my opinion.
Invalid trust. Right, I've never heard that before. This is
valid trust and invalid trust.
Hmm.
So I'm already betraying some of my philosophical bents, right? I'm a big believer in meritocracy, right? But and meritocracy should be based on trust, should be based on performance.
Yes.
Or the performance of trust, actually, right? And it you and I both know the world doesn't work like that.
Definitely.
A lot of times, not all the times, but a lot of the times.
What's I was going to ask you about meditation. You mentioned you're a meditator. How important has that? Well, I see we have 5 minutes left. You have a little more time than that, or you want to cut at 5?
Yeah, I'm fine. Especially if you want to talk about meditation, because that's critical. That's life changing.
Yeah. So let's dive into that, because I think this is a very important topic to talk about, especially for the stress of a business and its corresponding impact on your overall length of time that you're trying to have all this money to spend and enjoy life with. So, the floor is yours on meditation. What can you share with us about? Yeah, talk to us about meditation, how it's helped you on your journey.
Okay. how about the path to it and why it happened? Because
Okay.
it wasn't really fated to happen. I didn't grow up in a family that meditated, right?
Hmm.
So for me, meditation happened fairly organically. I at a very specific time in life that was not a good time. It was a dark time, right? So
Okay.
post 9/11, I had a very specific experience on 9/11. I think I shared this with you. My office was on the 26th floor of the Woolworth building in near Wall Street, and I saw the second tower go down. I walked and led my employees away from the damage, then went back down, and then volunteered to like take um, Tyvek suits and masks to firefighters on a supply depot line, just like dropping stuff so people could put on. And I did that for 2 or 3 hours, and by the end of that, I was pretty traumatized.
Yes.
So, uh, and I didn't know enough about this to. So I left New York. I went to Denver, and that's when we started our first fund. But I had a couple of years of therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and then at the end of the therapy, after learning a lot through like traditional, psychoanalysis and whatever, I came to what I think is sometimes described as the medication meditation interface.
Ooh.
So after 2 years of psychotherapy, I was talking to my shrink. My shrink says, I think you've made a lot of progress. If you're still not feeling good, and I was like, no, not. I feel pretty shitty about everything, pretty much. You know, the only thing left to do is medication. And if you want to try something other than medication, I would counsel you to try meditation.
Hmm.
That's that was the Frost poem. That's the fork in the road, brother. I
Wow.
mean, and I don't even take aspirin, so it was never an option to take a happy pill for me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? I I won't even take a children's aspirin. I can't stand any of that stuff. I mean, so I started looking around for the learning, the education uh, to try to find ways to self educate, and I stumbled on a couple of different traditions. There are many ways to meditate, right?
Yes.
Even if you consider some of these ridiculous like millennial and Gen Z forms of meditation that have to do with like the app, which I think is ridiculous. But you know, there's many like global traditions for meditating. So I
Mm-hmm.
stumbled on two. One is the Aloha tradition, the Hawaiian Polynesian tradition, which
Okay.
I just loved, and it has a lot in common with an Australian concept of uh, like they call it dreaming, the way the Aboriginals think about their relationship with the world, the physical world and the spiritual world. So that's one sort of set of traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I stumbled on something that I just to this day I think is the most powerful form of Asian. Uh, and it's not Tibetan, it's not Chinese. It's the tradition I stumbled on is called Vipassana, and
Okay.
it's based on silence. It's based on basically sitting with yourself for like epic periods of time. I'll come back to that in a minute. And not like reciting mantras like in the Tibetan tradition or even the or koans like in the Zen tradition. It's based on sitting with yourself and listening to the I don't know, man, the murkiness that percolates up from within you.
Hmm.
All the shit that goes through your head and your heart and some and when you let that clear itself out, it's like water in a tap, right? It runs brown in the beginning and then eventually it gets clear. So when you get to the point
Mm.
where it's percolating up clear, that's where the insight starts to happen.
Okay.
But it requires a lot of self-discipline to sit and be silent for long periods of time. 1 second.
Yep.
So those two things together. So I was talking about the time commitment. When I started meditating, I was pretty depressed. I was still borderline PTSD. The business, the current business was not doing well at that moment. I was alienated because I had left New York and went to Denver. And so, excuse me,
Bless you.
a lot of things all at once. So when I started, I would say for the first year, my average daily meditation was somewhere like 3 to 4 hours, and not nonstop for the whole year. And then it started to taper off.
Wow,
That's a lot of meditation,
that's a lot.
and that's like Dalai Lama level meditation. I mean, the Dalai
Mm-hmm.
Lama meditates for 2 hours a day, right?
Okay.
So it was a very pivotal moment in life. And what came out of it was a lot of clarity and a lot of insight and a lot of um, fear reduction, um, you know, uh, a lot of hopefulness, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
optimism. So, you know, it's I would counsel everyone who who wants to live a better life. It doesn't even have to be a longer life, a better life.
Yes.
In any walk of life, startups for sure, entrepreneurship for sure.
Hmm.
To at least try it. I mean,
We, you and I have had some discussions on introversion and extroversion. And
yep,
I think one of the silent things I have concerns that I don't necessarily share. Well, I guess now I'm sharing it, but I'm worried about the quote unquote introverts at home, or the people who align more to that side of the spectrum where it's not constantly talking to people, who are at home and who are even more so the young folks, and I think even more so the young women who are in families that are not necessarily as aware as to what's happening in the world and to how fast technology is shifting now with all this AI stuff, how much things will get automated. What advice do you have someone who does not align with the traditional, who does not align more on the extra? I'm trying not to like say extroverts and introverts, but who aligns more on the extroverted side of the spectrum, where I think a lot of success that we see, and I'm reading that book Quiet, that thing has been blowing my mind in terms of how much
yeah.
of the world is framed from an extrovert's point of view, and how much of success is like people just talking like me, um, or just me talking in general. But what advice do you have for folks at home who are not super extroverted to be successful?
Um. Well, one is know your history better, right? And which is to really understand the role of of quiet and introversion in the sort of publicized versions of success, right? The
Hmm.
traditional descriptions of success. Because I think when you take a lot of examples and you look behind the scenes, you start to see there's either the person, him or herself, is somewhat introverted anyway, or there's someone who played a pivotal role in that person's life who is introverted in the traditional
Wow.
definition. So,
Okay.
I think if you go and you look at your history and you start to really understand how it plays out, you'll see you'll see that introversion is not one. It's not a monolithic structure, right? There's it's a spectrum that you play on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would argue it's a kind of a tool that you can leverage. When you get sophisticated enough, you can leverage it, right, in order to do bigger things, versus being a victim of it, right? It's not something that you're victimized by. That I think comes from really looking around and trying to understand the world through a lens other than the traditional big man, big woman in history, like kind of journalistic historical perspective, which is bullshit. And I'm a historian, and I think it's bullshit.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot, and then I think part of the way to do that is maybe going back to. It's interesting that you asked these two questions in sequence, and maybe you did it on purpose. I believe that introversion, can be leveraged as a tool. The more you meditate, so
Hmm.
the more you and in some cases you can actually the definition of meditation is leveraging your introversion. So the
Wow.
more the more powerful you are as an introvert, the easier or the more organic it should be for you to be able to meditate, and your path to clarity and your path to power and insight should be a little bit more direct.
Yes.
I don't know. So it's interesting that you asked the two together, because I've always thought that they're related. Um, I'm pretty sure I'm an introvert, and over the years I've just learned how to use the other stuff, right, the more external extroverted type things, as different types of tools and language that you can put on and take off. But it comes, for me personally, it comes at great cost. It's
Mm.
exhausting and depleting. It's tough to do for a true introvert, no matter how much experience you have, like putting it on and using it as a tool.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I've
but
been
I think
learning.
introversion and meditation go hand in hand. And if you can, maybe meditation is the way that you leverage your introversion for self improvement
Hmm.
and for success. I don't know.
No, it's a good. I'm happy that you shared that, because I think I would have classified myself as an extrovert, and I think as I've gotten older, if you spend time with someone who is quiet and more introverted, you learn to be okay with that silence. And then as I've started to continuously meditate over and over in the past couple of months, I've been noticing myself getting more and more quiet, and I'm not talking as much. And then when I really saw the flip is when, now that I'm around people, I actually start to get drained physically and mentally. So I'm seeing this shift even from all the way on the complete extrovert side of the house coming back over to the left hand side. So this is good.
Hey, I want you to share with the audience the experience that we had, in Jamaica. So do you remember? It was either on the beach or it was at one of the dinners. But there was a host, right? Without naming names, there was one of the hosts of this grand event, very outgoing, performer, right? Of some success and stature, and we were in our little group, and we were
Mm-hmm.
part of his group, right? More than once, and the conversation was very open and free flowing and rollicking, and all over the place, right? And alcohol fueled and whatever else. And that's all of that is lovely, and the engage, there's a lot of talk about history and a lot of talk about culture and a lot of erudite, discussions going on. And I think between you and me, we said less than other people, right? And I
Yes.
know I said less. And it must have been noticeable on some level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because do you remember the point in the conversation where the host of the event like stops the conversation and points at me or something, and he says like, what do you do? What do you why are you I forgot
Mm-hmm.
exactly what he said. Do you remember that? He was like,
Yeah, yeah.
what's your thought? What Oh no, what's your superpower? That's what it
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, huh. One, I didn't really feel the need to answer because I don't give a shit what his question is, and I don't give a shit what the answer is. But it did dawn on me after, like, some, I think it took me like 15-20 seconds, right, to think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Do you remember what I said? You probably don't even remember.
Um,
You
I
don't remember.
I know technically I
Here's
don't.
what I said. Here's what I said. I said my superpower is I always tell the truth.
Mm.
And he was like flummoxed. He's like flabbergasted, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
like, and then, by the way, it was, but because he's an extrovert and I'm an introvert, he just went right back to being an extrovert. He didn't give it, on some level, he didn't give a shit.
Yes.
He just went right back to, like, that dynamic of like extroversion, holding court,
Mm-hmm.
guiding the conversation or monopolizing the whatever, right? and
No.
and it didn't so, it didn't even matter to him that much, really.
Mm-hmm. No, it
But
was
that's what I said, because that is the truth.
yeah, I do remember that, and it actually, that instance, And a book I've been reading, well, I read, called The Celestine Prophecy. Very interesting when it comes to energy, and it made me sort of realize how different people take and give energy to and from each other. And I'd seen a lot of
Right.
patterns of even myself as an extrovert in conversations with people, how I would dominate conversations. And then I'd point to Garnet and say, all right, Garnet, you tell us what's going on. What's up with you? Blah, blah, blah. And then almost force you to be on demand to my cues. And I learned a lot from spending time with more introverted folks or who align to that spectrum, that's actually not, that's more of a dominance thing versus a nice way to have a conversation. So it was very enlightening for me.
Look, here's another way why it's important for Trinities, in my opinion, to think
Okay.
about introversion. So I think Trinidadians, among all Caribbeans, have this reputation of being very independent, right, and very
Mm,
creative, very much, in their thing, right, whatever that is. If it's, if it's literature and nightfall, if it's, cricket and so, or if it's, sprinting and Otto Bolden, whatever, right?
right.
Um, we are it's a nation of like highly individualistic people, right? And high performing, high accomplishing people.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my take on the introvert. Introversion is the bridge to basically keeping your sort of national, personality in the wider world, because the wider
Ooh.
world is always going to be like that guy, asking me what my superpower is. And not that I give a shit, but
Mm-hmm.
the wider world, when you step away from the Caribbean and you get in, the world is always going to be like forcing you to be external with like what's special. That's how the world works.
Hmm.
And I think if you really understand how introversion works, it can be a way to be comfortable with your cultural, national personality and individuality in the face of all of this other stuff that's happening in the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my other
Oh,
take on introversion.
that's heavy. So you're home. You're always at home, essentially, if you align a little more to
Well,
that.
once you're comfortable with your introversion, correct, you're
Mm-hmm.
always home, and you always bring home with you. You always bring the power and the stability and the foundation of home with you.
Yes. Okay.
Doesn't matter what the ringleader says.
Hmm. No, this is that's powerful. So I have a couple quick questions for you, and we'll end. How has
Okay.
your Caribbean heritage contributed to your success as a venture capitalist and as an entrepreneur and just in general?
Okay. So I think fundamentally, coming from such a wildly diverse island, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
did you know that I just met my first white Trinidadian like
What,
3 months ago?
dude?
Like, so let me. I had to say that because it just. I think the guy that I met, the founder that I met, was like
Mhm.
upset with me because I literally said out loud, it's like, I are you sure you're from Trinidad? You're the only white guy I ever met who says he's native to
Mm.
Trinidad.
Okay,
So
okay,
okay, put that aside for that. I just thought that was funny. I'm
that
still
is
laughing
funny.
at that one. Coming from a place where Syrians, Lebanese, Polynesians, Black, Dogla, Indians, all like you know are cheek by jowl, elbow to elbow, and they all know each other. They all do things together. They all intermarry, right? They all fight, whatever. You know, coming to America and being and learning how to be comfortable in where I'm not the majority, but
Mm-hmm.
where there's a lot of like other people like around, and a lot makes you it gave me a really solid foundation for like understanding what diversity looks like, right?
Hmm.
My biggest problem with America is that I'm unlike Americans. I'm not fixated with like white versus black or black versus white. I don't give a shit. That's
Mm-hmm.
that to me is a very impoverished view of what the world can be,
Right.
because I come from Trinidad.
Yeah.
That's
Everybody
that's the
just
biggest thing,
normal.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so when I was like working my way up and there was only white people, I didn't think about it because I'm not like in this for like white versus black. That was never my perspective. It just happened to be that these contexts had a lot of white people in it, and I just kept rolling right along.
Mm-hmm.
As I got older, I realized that there's a lot of structural racism that makes certain worlds be very, very white, and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where my journey took me to Aperture, right?
I see. Okay.
But I think I was super comfortable in my brown skin among a lot of non-brown people, mostly white, because I come from a place where basically, we're super comfortable because there's lots of different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
you know so I would say that there was a foundation of like being comfortable in my own skin, that
Yes.
and coming from such a super diverse place. I always chuckled when people talked about diversity in America, because there's no way they're ever going to be as diverse as the Caribbean. It just
Right.
can't happen numerically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you
that'll put
know
everybody on.
so I would say that's the biggest thing, right?
Okay.
When you flip that a little bit, right? So I think, like, so my wife is white. I have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of white friends.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of surprise, that those people have when they think, and my black friends, like, so I'm like, I come from a place where basically, I think I'm superior, not because I'm brown and you're white, or I'm brown and you're black, or I'm brown and you're yellow. I think I'm superior because I come from the Caribbean. That's really it.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of that, like, I, what's his name, the basketball player,
LeBron?
shit.
I don't know.
No, his nemesis in the playoffs.
Steph
The
Curry?
the light skinned dude who can shoot.
Steph Curry. Probably, right?
Stephen Curry.
Stephen
Steph
Curry, yeah.
Curry. You know, a lot of my friends in like business college and stuff are always surprised by what Steph Curry calls irrational confidence. It's
Mm.
like, which is like, for him, it's like, I don't give a shit. I'm gonna shoot my shot, and that's that, and it's gonna go in, and to hell with all y'all. I'm gonna get 50, right? Uh, at every step of my career, I've had this like irrational confidence, and a lot of it comes from coming from Trinidad. I
Wow.
mean, I didn't expect anything else except like what I got in terms of success.
Hmm. I will.
Yeah, I started to get a little irritated at certain points where you might think, one begins to see that it's not a true meritocracy, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted it to be a real meritocracy, and certain milestones might have happened earlier for me, but whatever. You
Yes.
know, uh, there was never any doubt about like winning, because as a Trini,
You're gonna win.
I'm gonna win.
Hmm. That's good. That's a very good reminder, and I'm happy that you share that, because I'll keep remembering that in my head, and I think that's something I personally struggle with, is like, you always look for examples of yourself to know that you could kind of make it, and I think even in this project, meeting all the different people who've come from the diaspora has sort of padded that and remind you, like, hey, you could do some shit, you know. Okay. All right. What
Can
3
I
to
ask?
5?
Can I ask you something
Yeah,
about
yeah,
your other guests, though?
yeah. Talk to me. Let me hear it. Let me
Have
hear it.
any? Are they all Trini, or are they Caribbeans?
Most of them are Trini. We have some Jamaicans. We have a Bajan.
Okay.
So I'm trying to capture all the islands, actually.
Okay. All right. So have any of the Trinis been white?
Have any Trinis been right? They have. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, they. Oh shit.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's just me then. It's just
No,
me.
it's just you. It's just you. I went to school last year and fellas and things, so like
I had no
it's like,
idea. I didn't even know they existed. I swear to God.
you didn't stay home long enough, because you left. Like, what age did you leave home?
1970.
1970. How old were you when you left?
Well, were they hiding and they only came out after
No, you just probably didn't
1970?
go to like, it was like your school. Like, they didn't have
No, no,
Syrians
no.
in
Well,
my
that's
neighborhood,
that's
but
it. That's it, right? So I left before I started
right.
school. We were homeschooled in Trinidad,
Hmm.
right?
And you lived in South, so like, you typically don't
Yeah.
see a lot of Caucasian people down in South of Trinidad. They mostly live in the West. So unless you went to a West school, like, you wasn't going to interact with them anyway. You know what I mean? So okay, that was interesting. All right, last two questions. What 3 to 5 books would you recommend to people for life and career?
What? Say it again.
What 3 to 5 books would you recommend for like life,
Oh,
business,
all right.
career?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Here.
Okay. Oh, you have them right there too. Okay, interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that book.
One that you like,
Mm-hmm. Quiet
right?
that's a serious book.
So I read a lot of stuff that is I read a lot of stuff that is literary, but like
Okay.
social and philosophical, right? Like it's easier for me to it's hard for me to read like sociology and politics and stuff like this just as nonfiction, but I
Mm-hmm.
like to see it incorporated, right? So
Okay.
let me find one here. Here we go. I'm also a big fan of children's books, by
What?
the way.
Okay. That's interesting.
Here's two children's books that I would
What?
counsel everyone to
Children's
read.
books?
Oh hell yes!
Really? Okay. How to behave and why? Okay. All right. I'm somewhat taking you seriously.
This is a classic. Every kid must read
The Story
this.
of Ferdinand. I don't think I've read that before. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. All right. There you go. That's 3.
You one more.
Trying to think what else I have around here.
That's interesting that you said Quiet was like your, well, I guess that was your closest book. Okay.
Yeah, I read it fairly recently. I read it like a couple of months ago. So.
Yep. Okay.
Trying to think of like big literature things. Oh well, I mean.
What about? Oh, I got one.
I don't think you can be so your audience is Trini. I don't know how you can be a Trini and not read Naipaul and I mean both Naipauls, right? VS and Shiva, because his brother was a fine writer. Shiva was a fine writer.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a lot of travelogues, and his travelogues are excellent.
Okay. What about venture capital books, or books on
what? Oh, come on, man!
I don't know your VC. I must ask you. I mean,
I'm not talking about that. No, but there is, there's book learning, and then there's like learning, right? Most of my VC is learning.
Learning. Okay.
You know how I got to where I got. I invested personal money when I didn't have a lot, and we made a lot of money over the years, and that's how I learned. So, if you want to learn, don't from a book. Don't come to me. Don't come to me for a recommendation. Come with your wallet.
Okay.
That's how you learn.
All right.
Because that's the problem with VC, brother. Everybody thinks it's OPM, right? Other people's money. And they act like assholes because of it.
Okay.
When you're investing your own money and you have to win, otherwise your family on some level is going to suffer. That's how you learn VC.
Ooh, that's big. That's all right. Here's a last. This
you
is
don't need a book. You need a wallet.
You need a wallet, not a book. All right, I'll make sure. Now I know what to do with my savings. Okay, last question. You're stuck on an island with a chef who could only cook 3 things, but you get to choose the 3 things that he cooks. What would you choose?
All right. Curry number 1.
Yep. Okay.
Some kind of curry. I don't even give a damn what it is. Just some kind of curry. 2 more, huh?
It could just be curry, man. Curry man is a little happy with that.
I still have a thing. All these years later for some version of macaroni pie, macaroni and cheese in America. I just it's like it does things to my brain when I put it in my mouth. I don't know what it does, but macaroni
and cheese, okay, or macaroni pie.
And then this is straight from Trinity upbringing. For some reason, I'm absolutely fixated with like just plain cucumber.
What?
Cucumber with salt. Cucumber with vinegar. I could eat it all day long as salad.
Okay. No, yeah, you
No
remember.
cooking there, but maybe he could make up like a little shark bake type sauce and put it on the cucumber. I don't know.
Well, that is mother-in-law essentially. Pepper, cucumber, vinegar. So okay, man.
Yeah, that's it.
Vibes. Well,
You don't need a lot, man. But if he gets the curry right, everything is okay.
yeah. You're safe. You're safe. You're safe. Cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and some of your stories on the show. And to be honest, sharing your candor and sharing the realism and remind folks at home that the game is different,
Thank you for having me.
Most certainly. All right. We'll talk soon.